You're listening to Haunted Tales with Skoto the Reaper. Log found in Keld's Keep by Do Highlight 8513. Scratch these words into the cracked bone-dry parchment of the enemy general's torn journal, from which was the only loot I could gain from his chambers. It is the year of our Lord, 1320. I have found a blasphemy made flesh in the dungeon under the keep of Lord Keld. I journal now in fear of being attacked during the night. If this journal is found on my corpse or by itself, make sure it is returned to my own commanding general, General Smith Bourbon, if he is alive. If not, then heed this journal as a warning. It began this morning when the siege began. The keep was a strange thing. No lines to indicate separate bricks or building blocks. Instead, it was as if the keep had grown from the earth. It stood, bent forward slightly, and in the rising light of that morning, it loomed over us and cast a great shadow, and was undermanned for one of its size, a force of only a few hundred, where there should have been at least 1,000. I charged on foot by General Bourbon's side, and our blades passed like sturdy ships through waves of sickly soldiers. The opposing Frenchmen's armor was devoid of tabard or symbol of allegiance, as they had deserted their prince for a reason unknown to all in the company. I'd be one of the first to break into the main hall. The hall had been converted into a den of beasts. Food laid everywhere. All the servants, maids, and even the families of those who had worked at the keep had been heaped onto a great fire in the middle. Keld himself had been reduced to a similar bestial state. The man wore no armor, no clothes, his form excessive with fat, and in the light of the corpse fire, one could see the turgid skin glistening with grease and sweat. It took little time for the bastard blade of Smith to split the man true and clean across the belly, and the Lord's final words rang in the hall of grizzled mercenaries before me, and a particularly burly soldier called John ordered to drag him into the flames. The deer ran under the castle. We have to get it out. We have to drag the deer out before it kills us all. Lord Keld did not scream as the flesh burnt and the fat sizzled, and our own feast began before the corpse stopped twitching. After the feasting and the looting of the main hall was finished, I sat around the fire with one other of my company, the aforementioned John. Our chain armor still on, and the wide-brimmed steel caps we had worn into battle resting to the side, along with our short blades. It was at that point I tore into the leg of a boar, the meat juices spilling down my chin as I spoke. How much longer are you staying with us? The man of only 20 gave a smile, even as he wrapped a bandage around his calf. Another 10 years, hopefully. That's how long you've been a mercenary, yes? Mm-hmm. It astounds me you're not relaxing in some cozy chateau. You're getting paid 4 pence a day, and double if you're fighting. I should have enough to retire from my life within the next 2 years. Aye, and I hope you do. John gave me a smile that spoke of the swagger of youth that I had long ago abandoned. Do you think I'm not cut out for this life? All men are cut for killing, and it's the Lord's word that we should stray from partaking in the blood of man. War is not counted as a sin. Aye, it isn't. But that doesn't mean it's good for the soul either. John leaned back and glanced to the side, watching as the other companymen laughed and drank together. All of them were similar in age, young men who were blind to the fact that death rode at our backs, and it would clamp its jaws around any straggler that fell behind our grim horde. John spoke again. Why do you not retire, then, if you consider it bad for the soul? I had not the heart to tell him that I in fact enjoyed the bright madness of battle. But before I could form a response, our general, strong of jaw and possessed of a certain hardness in the eyes, stepped from the inky darkness, the only one among us who possessed the armor of a knight. He beckoned to me, and I stood straight and right in front of him. "Smith." The general nodded at me, speaking in a low tone. "I need you and John to search the dungeons for prisoners. I trust you'll show the new recruit what to do with prisoners, yes?" My eyes darkened a slight bit, though the process was familiar. It was different when cutting down someone who wasn't a soldier. But pay must pay. "Aye." Smith turned and strode away to begin passing out the other men their pay. I made a motion for John to follow me, and we began walking. The keep's interior was as strange as its exterior, halls winding in inefficient ways, and I swore we walked far, far longer than a building that size should allow. As we reached the door to the dungeons, which was cracked wide open, we grabbed some unlit torches from their sconces and knelt to the floor to try and light them. As we sparked our flint and steel, I eyed the door, then backed down the unnaturally long hallway. There should have been men here. We'd passed by none on our way here, and none had come with the general. "Oh! Hey, look!" John had stepped over to the door, and reached not a foot in front before he dragged back a solid pry bar. "I guess they left their tools behind." A cold shiver had run down my spine, that old instinct from the times before the time of men flared its ugly head, growling and warning me that there were likely still soldiers in the keep. Perhaps the bulk of the keep's real force was hidden away in the dungeons, a spider luring a fly into its web. I seized John by his collar, and faster than he could react, dragged him back from the door. I ignored his struggles as I rushed to return to the main company. As soon as we got back, Smith had the spearmen descended into the dungeons like the angels descended on Sodom and Gomorrah, ready to annihilate the heathen and cleanse the stones with the blood of fellow man. But here is what we found. There had been 2 men who were ordered to get the dungeons open, and at the foot of the stairs were the mangled remains of 2 men. Their armor had not been cut free. It had been rended apart by blunt force, and their flesh was melted together. The bloody sinew, which had been freed from its prison of skin, was still steaming, and there was a pool of blood on the floor that was no doubt hot to the touch. It would have been hard to tell that the mass was made of 2 bodies, but 2 skulls and different colored eyes were distinguishable from one another. All men gagged at the sight. It was a sight that was aberrant even to men accustomed to brutality and bloodshed. It was only Smith that stood 2 steps from the bottom, face hard and immovable as stone, though he would not gaze on his former subordinates directly. I must confess in this journal, though I did not report it to my commanding officer or the general, but I believe I saw the bloodshot blue and green eyes of the flesh mass blink. Even now, sitting with my back to the wall and the fire glowing not 10 feet away from me, I've taken long moments to think about what I've seen. For the first time since my first siege, I feel fear, and the fire has not yet chased away the chill of the keep's corridors. Every man has locked himself in a bedroom, even our general. I've elected to stay in the main hall by the fire. Someone has to take watch after all. John lays across from me, on the other side of the flames. Smith has sent scouts into the dungeons to search for hidden passages or troops. It has been 2 hours since they've walked into the dungeons. I fear they will not return. I write in the main hall of Keld's keep. We're at half in number compared to last night and all awake. Comrades locked shoulder to shoulder, holding weapons. Smith sits behind us, holding together the facade of the cool, cold general, even as I see him gripping that silver cross at his neck, hard enough where blood trickles down the leather bracer on his forearm. I write this to mark what I believe might be the downfall of the Red Banner Company, and to warn against setting or sieging this keep. I passed out not long after finishing the last log. In the morning we awoke to yelling. The scouting party had not returned as all had feared. There was much arguing about what to do. Me and John only watched on, until it was eventually settled that we should move down into the dungeons as a horde. I say we, but me and another soldier were tasked with burying the roughly separated flesh we had found in the dungeons. Perhaps that's what saved me. We were in the keep's courtyard amongst the barren gardens, struggling to break the hard ground with old shovels. Our armor had been doffed to make the task easier, so the stench of sweat was hard in the air, and the cold autumn winds burnt the insides of my nose. It was actually kind of peaceful, and if the doors to the grand hall had not been barricaded, I might have been writing this out there now. But we had barely gotten the first man buried when we heard the echo of some clamor inside. So we hastily strapped on our armor and took up our short blades before rushing back inside. We both ran to the dungeons, down the stairs, and past the dried pool of blood that stretched from one cell to another. But before we could even make it to the end of the dungeons, some of our comrades fled past us, when shouldering me and knocking me flat to my ass, where I heard from the darkness beyond my sight. General Smith shouted, "Cowards don't get paid! Stand your ground, or your pay will suffer!" Something had flown past me like a cannonball, and the thunderous crash of armor, accompanied by the sickening crunch of bone, told me it was another soldier. I didn't hesitate, running back with the others where I caught a glimpse of the thrown troop. His breastplate had been rended wide open, along with the skin, flesh, and bone. The man's chest cavity had been completely exposed, his ribs opened wide, as if inviting additions to his anatomy, rivers of blood running down his sides. I fled, with the others without question. We all went back and settled into the main hall, spears and blades ready. All of the bowmen had survived, and they took up their bows, notching arrows in them. Among the cowards was in fact Smith, though he repeated that mantra no longer, instead, staring grimly down the hall, awaiting beast or man, I know not. In the end, that thing in the dungeons had claimed 25 lives in less than 4 minutes, and there was only one wounded who managed to escape with us. I look at him now, seeing the injuries, horrible indentations in the flesh down his chest. The chain shirt he had worn has been ruined. It looks nothing like any injury I've seen. The only apothecary among us speaks about how the flesh wasn't struck but parted of its own will. We've taken the long table, all the chairs, and anything remotely movable was pushed up against any door that could lead to the dungeon, even in the most roundabout way. What little was left or couldn't fit onto the makeshift barricades was tossed into the fire, and now the hall roars with a great bonfire, and now the orange and red glow fills these oddly shaped stone halls. John huddles close, and has asked me to watch over him as he sleeps. Smith is laid up in the corner, though he flips in his sleep. There's maybe 5 men awake, and in the hall, all I could hear was the crackle and pop of the fire, the distant sound of crickets, and the talk of the men. They speak of a beast. They say the devil is in those dungeons, and they've let it loose. I thought the devil talked in charms and fought with fire. Village priests never spoke of the devil like this. It's right, I suppose, for godless men to be brought to their end by the devil. We've been warned of this fate. But nevertheless, the men try and fail to describe it to each other, saying it reeks of dead flesh and a floral scent. They say it brayed like a horse, that in all the chaos and panic, all they managed to catch was white hide, ridden in bloated yellowish pustules. That dungeon was barely big enough to fit a man, much less any beast bigger than a donkey. I pray to my God and all the saints I shall make it through this, for as I finish this log, I see the wounded man break into a sweat as he whimpers alone in the corner. It's the 3rd day at Keld's keep. When I was a boy, I was isolated from the more populated parts of Germany. That's why the sight of bodies on top of bodies, fingers turned black. It was horrifying to me when I first saw it. My mother would oft place her hand in front of my eyes to try and shield what innocence I had left, but once I had seen it first, it would make me shiver at the sight of my bird masks and any sign of disease. And after that, I never went with her to the market again. That's why I did what I did, with the Son of God as my witness. I did us all a favor when I dragged the wounded man into the bonfire the moment I saw his rotting blackened fingertips. The horrid screams pierced the morning, but by the time all had awoken I was deaf enough to be under my bedroll, and act disturbed with the rest. All assumed it was some symptom of madness brought on by the sight of a devil. We couldn't have left. Every single time we touched a door that would have led to sweet freedom, we felt our boots grow heavy, our flesh leaden with 1,000 pounds. When I touched the door in the middle of the night, it reminded me of the way my father would look at me when I slacked in the fields. It makes my back go ramrod straight and puts the fear of God into me. I find myself asking if this is what it feels like to be besieged. But perhaps I should have done so, for now the wrath of a demon has fell on me. I must apologize for my meanderings. I loathe to speak of the events that occurred at sunrise. After the burnt man was discovered, he was dragged into a corner and left to rot beneath a sheet. Then Smith gathered us all, and with a grim determination told us of great hunts, and of the pay we shall receive if we should kill a demon and present it to the Vatican. No man was roused by his speech, as they usually were, but there was little other option, and we were all restless. We took up our arms and armor, most men consuming the last of the ale and wine that we had reserved, so their nerves would be eased and their excitement risen. These were the first of the men. Decidedly I took up the wounded man's bow, and although I meant for the front lines, no one seemed keen to correct my position. We marched in sync into the hallway of the dungeons, 25 strong. I stood at the back, only Bourbon himself stood behind me. We heard its furious cry first, like a cross between a horse braying and an elk bugling. But in the confines of the hall it was so loud and hurt so much, our ears bled, and the men next to me wept. The infantry rushed forward with spears and blades aimed forward, as if a dozen or even 24 mortal weapons stood a chance against it. We drew our bows back and shot into the darkness, for still we could not see it. I heard spear find flesh. When the swords were swung, it sounded like an army of butchers in sync. The bugling only grew louder and louder, above all the cries of anger and bravery. I heard cries of pain, too. I heard a horrid sound like metal being bent and scraping against itself, the wet crunch of meat being compressed down to the bone, the sound of men being chewed as if they were simply morsels. It shocked me when I saw we were being pushed back, a wave of soldiers being hoisted up off the ground by a massive thing the size of the hallway. Lord in heaven above, I apologize for my cowardice. I threw my bow and arrows down before I even saw its face. I ran back into the darkness behind me, knocking the general to the ground as I ran. In a flash my armored form was stowed away in a cell, the door shut tight, my dagger and sword wedged and bent horribly to keep the door barred. I could not free them now if I tried, nor should I want to. My back hit the cell wall, and I slid down to my ass, watching as the men were pushed into eyesight, as they are and have been stomped underfoot by that thing. Bourbon rose his blade in the darkness, ready to meet the beast in combat. He never got the chance. A split and rotted foot from the flesh mass slammed into the top of his head, crushing it to the ground as it pressed, before sinking through the flesh and bone with cracking and popping. In the end, the general died bravely. I wish for that to be known. Then the bugling stopped, and it wasn't until then I realized all my comrades were dead. There was a silhouette in front of the bars, huge, taking up the whole space. It had no natural shape, and I theorized now its body might stretch back and back to whatever infernal hole this thing escaped from. It did as vaguely that of a horse's, as it bends down, attempting and succeeding, as it breaks apart the general's armor with its flat teeth. It reeks in here, like 1,000 battlefields on a hot summer's day. I write to say, whether you be under siege, or whether ye besieging, leave this place, For your own soul's sake, leave this place. It turns its head towards me and is pressing itself against the bars, pus and blood flowing from its body as it started bugling again. Would that I could. I wished to have to die with my brothers in arms.